Welcome back to the Energy Sovereignty Project and our closeout for the 4th week in May. We've gotten past some of the mistakes that we made in the 3rd week. This week has given us some pretty consistent weather, and the tail end of this week has turned into basically a repeat of what we saw last year as far as when the entire system really starts to peak. Well, we're closing today out, and it's not quite solar day yet, end of solar day yet. It's actually just a little past 3 in the afternoon. And the reason that we're closing it out now is that the system has already been at 100% and exporting power for the last couple of hours. Came home a little early. I'm going to go ahead and peak the charge on the car back up to 90%, do a couple loads of laundry, all of that while the sun is shining, and then the idea being that by the end of the day that we'll be back to 100%. Again, we start talking about all the energy transfer and decision point when it's the most advantageous to put power to the grid, stop charging the batteries. If I had control over it, I probably, for yesterday and today, I probably would have set the system to about 70% and then started sending power out to the grid earlier, because there's no point in filling the batteries up and keeping them at 100%. Again, just to kind of recap, lithium-ion batteries, they don't like to be at 100%. They don't like to be 100% discharged. And that's why Tesla was very clever about the way that they made the power walls. Each power wall, too, they gave it a bit of freeboard. So even when it's 100%, it's never really 100% charged. And when it's discharged, it's never really completely discharged. And so that's helpful, but it would also be nice to be able to control that this time of year when days come along where you just don't need to charge it all the way and you have plenty of power coming in. We'll review the numbers for today. By the end of the day, we'll be preparing the video back at the studio, and so we'll be able to take a look at the numbers for today. But it's going to be a high production day, pretty much a benchmark day. It's a little hazy, but we should see, I'm expecting a output in excess of 60 kilowatt hours for the day. And with that, let's go ahead and just head back over to the studio and spend some time crunching the numbers. All right, well, let's get this week started. Compared to last week, this week is rather uneventful, which I suppose is ultimately what we're striving for, since we don't really want to be futzing around with the system all the time. We want it to just kind of happily operate in the background and then provide the homeowner with very little to make a YouTube video about. But let's pick up where we left off on the 21st. So we had a couple days of thunderstorms on the 21st and 22nd. I didn't use the thunderstorm graphic though, because it all pretty much happened north of where we are and closer to the Sierras. And so because we didn't have any electrical activity in our area, I just kind of left that off. But for the day, coming off the previous week's weather, from around the 18th or so, the system has been holding its own and supplying the home with its power, and then also what little driving I've been doing has been covered. We recovered from our little mistake on the 18th and 19th, and the system started the day at 18%, as you see here, and finished with a solid 40%, following decent contribution of the day. We got a little over 50 kilowatt hours there. 20.3 went to the home, 20 kilowatt hours went to the vehicle. And here's the notes. Nothing really remarkable here. Daily vehicle data starting the day at 40% charge and ending at 61. Give you a second to look over that real quick. Time's up. Here we have the 22nd, and a bit of rain, mostly in the early morning though, so we got good production in the mid 50 kilowatt hour range there, as you see, starting the day at 26% and peaking around 80%. And just before the end of total solar day, we wound up putting 29 kilowatt hours to the vehicle to restore its charge to 90%. Basically from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. is our production period. Obviously you don't get very much at the tail ends of those, but still it's interesting to see how long they've been stretching out. And so then here's the notes. Like I was saying earlier about the since last charge data there, I have to be careful to collect that as soon as the charge starts, or the data winds up resetting itself once the car finishes charging, and then I miss it. There's no way to pull it back up later. And I'll probably stop recording that since last charge data after this month, because it's really only important in tracking the vehicle losses. But this might be handy. For this month, because we're going to be focusing quite a bit on finding out where our losses are, finding out where the efficiencies are in the system, and then that'll help you guys design your own systems, decide whether or not the Powerwall 2 might work for you with its embedded inverters. We can discuss that at the end of June. But one thing let's share this here. One thing that is interesting to add here is the forecast. And so I know I only rarely include this in our weekly recap, but it's worth mentioning that this is something that I do look at on a daily basis, and I do this with a mind towards how systems are going to be set up in the future. What data are they going to have available to them? What decisions are they going to make according to that data? And I find that I'm most interested in the percentage of cloud cover that you see just on the very right hand side there. And this allows us to translate that directly into a rather highly accurate prediction of how much power in the system, how much power that will be put into the system on any given day, according to how much cloud cover is shown for that day. And we've been pretty accurate in our predictions with that. So now, this being a 5-day forecast, it's also important not to place too much credibility on days 4 and 5. I've seen those numbers change pretty drastically in the past, especially in winter and spring, where the weather here is extremely changeable. So the first 2 days in lines 2 and 3 there, obviously the first line is today, or that day that it was taken, and then lines 2 and 3 next day and the day after that are pretty accurate. And so here we have the 23rd. Bit of rain, overcast. Didn't do anything more than spritz. I think that's just what it shows there. Still decent production, a little over 50 kilowatt hours. Enough to get us from 36% charge at the start of the day and finish up with 80%. And then the AC starts to kick on around this time of year. I recorded it there. It didn't really contribute much today. Obviously, as you can see, that our total daily use was relatively low at 18.3 kilowatt hours. But the AC did kick on a couple of times, so I decided to record that. And then here is the notes for the 23rd. Again, pretty standard, other than not charging the car for the day. Again, I worked late, so the charge reflected on the following day, since the power was delivered after midnight. Give me a second to look that over. And here we have the 24th. Good production day. Overcast in the morning, but that burned off mostly in the afternoon, giving us a 62.4 kilowatt hours of production for the day. And here's where we get our first real taste of basically what we're going to continue to see happen to the system for the next 2 months or so. But we peaked it out. Other than that, it was a pretty standard day. Start of the first solar contribution is happening, like I said earlier. It's really early in the morning now. Let's just look at that for a second here, and then the notes. And again, repeating what I said earlier about the since last charge data, that SLC data. After June, I'm going to leave this off the daily log, as it's just going to be rolled into the efficiency at the end of the year, and then it'll simply fold the losses in as an annual line item for the total losses for the vehicle. Because again, that relates to specifically to the Tesla Model S, and I'll do a special report on that now that I've put well over 100,000 miles on the vehicle. It gives us a good idea, of what is possible with an electric vehicle, and some details in regards to maintenance and those other kinds of really drastic differences between electric vehicles and gasoline vehicles. Right here we have the 25th. Good production day. Starting the day with the system at 85% because of the previous day where we peaked. And today is no different. Daily production of 48.3 kilowatt hours, even with the overcast conditions. Home use of just over 20, and that showed us sending 20.7 kilowatt hours to the grid. I just thought this was kind of an interesting day where we sent to the grid almost exactly the amount of power that we used for the day. That was kind of interesting. And we're still running about 10 kilowatt hours less than our daily average for a sunny day this time of year, just because the temperatures are so mild. Here's the notes. Again, went to a barbecue with some friends and wound up working late. So again, the charge for the day appears on the following day. And then another consideration was that I have a overnight house guest coming following day, and he also has an electric vehicle. And just a second here to look at that. Again, it's basically just a recap of what I said. And so then here we have the 26th. And this one gets a little busy, so let me go ahead and walk you through this a little bit here. We start off with the usual. We start the day at 88% after charging to 100% the previous day. And then you've got a little bit of overnight losses and that kind of a thing. And some slightly rainy weather, but still, had some decent production. And then now with the total solar day percentage, what you see there is that we have that 100% listed, and that's because by noon the system was already peaked, and we even sent a little bit of power to the grid. And so then I was home already waiting for the arrival of my friend Mike, and he's the one that had that red Chevy Bolt that you saw in a previous video, and I wanted to make sure that the system was as close to 100% when he started to charge. I didn't know how much power he was going to need, and wanted to make sure he could get it all from the battery if he needed to charge his car fully. And so as you can see by the as you saw by the notes, or not by the notes, but by the log entry for that day, I missed by about 2%, and we wound up peaking at 98%. But we started charging his car, and this brings us back to that decision point in the forecast, right? So here's the forecast for the 26th, and you'll notice that the actual cloud cover for the day wound up being 62%, and we're getting rain for the day. And if you remember back to that previous forecast that I showed you, that it was slated today to be 32%. All right, and so again, that's that whole thing where it's quite reliable for the first couple of days, but the extended forecast gets a little more dicey. Anyway, so let's bring up the notes for the 26th, and then we'll look at the graphic for that a little bit too. But the note's basically recapping what I just said. You know, my friend reported his power consumption and his mileage to me, so we were able to add that at the top of the log section that you saw there. Thanks for sending that data, Mike. His Bolt is quite a bit more efficient than the Tesla Model S is. And so if you recall the forecast I just showed you, because we predicted to have only 23% cloud cover for tomorrow, then we can go ahead and discharge the system to 20% if needed. And in the end, after charging both vehicles and running the home, we ended our total solar day at 30%, just a little over 30%. And I also have a second page of notes here. And this gives you an idea of what the day looks like from the Tesla's data collection perspective. You can see the small gray spike downward around noon. That's where the system briefly sent power to the grid. Let's look at that for just a minute. It's kind of busy, so feel free to hit pause if you need a little more time to take a closer look. And so then here we have the 27th. And again, I have to apologize. I haven't really been doing a lot of driving these past couple of weeks. There's just been quite a bit to take care of around the studio, and been a bit of a homebody lately. And so as you can see here, starting with just what we'd expect, where we left off yesterday, just under 50 kilowatt hours of production, and on this overcast day, the total solar day wound up coming up to 65% with all the vehicle charging we did yesterday. And again, because the day was overcast and the temperatures being completely neutral, the AC system was turned on, but I didn't even include the icon for the day because it just simply didn't kick on. The fan cycled a couple times maybe, but no significant contribution. And then the notes, and again, the notes just basically say what I just said. And also, as I said, I've been in the studio late in the evenings recently, and so not only does this mean that I'm not home cooking or using power for other things, but sometimes it delays when I charge the car. And so then here's the 28th. Again, starting at 47%, we peaked in the afternoon and wound up sending 4 kilowatt hours to the grid. And again, the AC is on, but again, I didn't include the icon because it just simply wasn't a contributing factor. 6 kilowatt hours to the vehicle in the early morning, basically just to keep it topped off. And then the notes, just like the previous day, the temperature never really varied from what the AC set point was at around 74 for the entire day and the evening. So, other than that, just basic vehicle data. And then here we have the 29th. Sunny day. A little too hazy for me to put this down as a benchmark day, but it was pretty close. We're looking at, again, over 60 kilowatt hours of production. The home is now going back to its spring consumption mode, with AC accounting for a decent hit on the day's total consumption. And here we have the notes. And like I said, as shown, we got 2 charge periods. I was trying to pull some off of the power wall to minimize what was pulled off of the grid. And this was actually the day that I shot the video for the intro. This is usually where I leave off the 4th week, but the studio session here is actually happening on the 1st of June, and since I had some things take me away from the system in the area the last couple of days, we'll just go ahead and continue with the 30th and the 31st. Here's the 30th. As you can see, peaked the system out fairly early in the day. Wound up sending a little over 15 kilowatt hours to the grid. And that's after topping off the car. AC again accounting for a bit of additional home load. putting us right in that kind of 30 range. And then the notes, nothing really of merit to see here, just vehicle data. Give me just a second with that. And then finally we got the 31st. Again, starting at 85%, the system was peaked out. This time it peaked out right around noon. And then the result was we sent a whopping 22.9 kilowatt hours to the grid. I'll add the miles driven to this log when we do the closeout for the month, when I have the data at the close of today. And then the notes. Again, what I said about the system peaking out about noon. And that's about that. Let's close out this video by taking just a moment here to discuss decision points as they relate to this time of year and the efficiencies of our peak solar production times of year. When the system peaks out, or when you suspect it's going to peak out on any given day, that's the time when you want to put a bit of charge in the car, do some chores, do some cooking. Obviously, this is sometimes not practical because you're not home, you're at work or whatever. But in an ideal situation, in the future, maybe, you know, timed appliances or those types of things can be accomplished during these times, but it's just a matter of that's when it's the most efficient to do so. The other thing that would be really helpful is to be able to get a set point in the system that is not 100%. I'd love to have set this somewhere around 50 to 70% on the vast majority of the days that we've just had, because I just don't need I don't need the extra storage in the batteries. And if I can let them relax a little bit over the summer, all the better. And that'll make them last longer. And like I said, for our system and the amount of driving that I do, you know, that number is likely somewhere between 50 and 70%. You know, the battery's happy place. And then we know when cloudy days are predicted, you know, then you can go in the system. Eventually will be able to set itself that way. It'll see that those days coming, and then instead of putting power to the grid, it'll set its system to 100%, get past those summer thunderstorms or the storms that we'll see as we start to go into that shoulder period at the end of summer in a few months. And that brings this week to a close. I'll take a day or two to compile the data and my thoughts as we get ready to present the closeout for May. And we're looking forward to some special updates in the end of June, because June represents that middle period in the year where we get our peak amount of output. And because it's the middle of the year, now we can really crunch that data and get really good extrapolations on what our year is going to look like. But the thing I'm most excited to present at the end of June is the efficiencies, and that's going to be our focus for June. Is we're going to be, because now the system is producing as much power as it's going to, this gives us the greatest ability to look at the amount of power produced per those losses that we're seeing, the difference between what the Solar Edge reports that it has collected from the PV systems, and then what the Tesla Gateway is reporting that it has collected and delivered. We have all that data, and so now we'll be able to present that so we can get a handle on how much power we're losing by transferring it back and forth through all of those inverters. But that's about it for this week. Again, if this is something that you enjoy seeing, please feel free to like and subscribe. Pass this video on to anybody who you think will be interested in it. And we'll see you again in a few days.